All the world's a stage, right? Okay. Ah.
All Saints Day. All right, we're live. 7
Okay, well, welcome this morning. Let's see if I can look at this. Let's look at this example first, counterpoint example. All right, and I think at some point we actually went over something like this, but since I have become enlightened, right, I might have a different take on it. Actually, we might not have gone over this particular exercise. That, this, is into oops. Worse still. Okay. All right, this is supposedly an example of combined 2 and 3. That's the dough or a variety of them, okay? All right, so tell me about this little example. Look at the concentration of dissonance that's in this progression. The downbeat is what? A 3-3, yes?
6-6.
6-6, right? Okay, it's a 6-6, and the next downbeat is a 6-3, right? Okay. Well, so far, the consonant frames are just hunky-dory, right? Okay. Well, let's just look at the second species for a moment. What is the function of the second half note here?
Skipped passing tone.
Yeah. Yes, it would have to be, right? Because there is no stepwise connection here. And so if we were to move this, do, sol, fa, that would give you the skip passing tone, yes? This just changes direction, or octave registers, right? So that's fine. Now, that is correct. These two notes in a second species are correct. The downbeat sonorities are correct. But, oh my goodness, what's wrong? What's happening here? That is dissonant with that. That isn't a problem as such, is it? I don't think so. But when this note moves, this becomes dissonant on so many different levels, right? It's dissonant with the cantus firmus, it is dissonant with the second species, and then, besides that, this produces yet another dissonance, right? So what's the explanation of this? Where are the principal consonances in the third species line?
Beat 1 and 4. Is that what you're asking about?
This in relationship to that, is that a consonant or a dissonance? It's a dissonance, yes. Well, these two tones are dissonant. That tone is dissonant. Does that violate a principle of counterpoint?
Is this a
What's the rule? Consonants together, dissonance in between. If you have two dissonances, then they must appear as consonances, right? So is this, what kind of progression is this? Or, to answer the other question, what are the main notes in the third species? What is it trying to do?
Well, presumably, if you take out the second species entirely, you have 6-5 with a neighbor note.
Yes, okay, that's an explanation, all right? So we've got 6-5, and that becomes a neighbor note. But this is an illegitimate progression, right? Yes, because of the second species. All right, well, what is a deeper explanation for this?
La si do.
No.
Well, if you reduce the third species line to a second species as Do-C, you would have a valid progression with all voices.
Yes. Well, then what does that tell you? What is the consonants actually here that's represented here? This is really what kind of sonority? You've already said it. Do you understand what, I mean, is it clear what she just said? You're seeing this, right? This is the sonority. But this is not, that's alien, right? This tone should actually be there, right? Or is there. Yes? Okay? So if you disregard this, this becomes a 5-3, right? Is it clear what goes on here? And because of the stepwise connection here, I don't think that there's such a problem with this. All right, the problem is that note, is that doubling, right? If that doubling were not there, could we put something else there that might make this legitimate? What could we put there? Yeah. Wouldn't that kind of help it? Certainly. And this would become, where does that neighbor originate? If we're considering as a neighbor tone, which it is, it originates in G, right? Sol, La, Si. You got that? All right, so is this an acceptable progression in 2 plus 3? Well, the counterpoint book calls this prolonged counterpoint. What do they mean by that? It's not simple, right? There are complex issues in the origination of the dissonance. The only problem here is the fact that you start with that note. This note in itself is perfectly legitimate in second species, but you maintain a change of sonority inside this bar, yes? Which in my opinion is perfectly legitimate. But this note here confuses the function of that note because it is dissonant, yes? But if we assume that that note is simply not there, and it wouldn't be, that's a doubling, right? It's a doubling of a tone. And this is the main note that's imagined. Then the progression immediately resolves itself. So on one level, we are hearing this as a 6-5 displacement. The anomaly is the fact that this tone is doubled. If it were not doubled and this tone were there, not only would it give you a complete sonority, and then the motion into the next bar would be perfectly adequate, right? Everything falls into place. That is a neighboring tone that appears on the second half of the bar. I think that this configuration is perfectly acceptable, but it does show you that emerging in the combined species of counterpoint, you begin to see that the individual notes or the individual species have their own relationship, but they are governed by some kind of sonority or element that is on a much deeper level. And I think if you can all hear this, I'm sure, that pretty much makes sense, yes? The problem is this against that, not this against anything else, right? Any questions about that? Now, I am almost certain that if you wrote that or did that in somebody's counterpoint class, would they consider it right or wrong?
Wrong.
Wrong, yes. Okay. So when you get to combined species, you're already in the world of prolongation, tones or sonorities that are prolonged in advanced ways. So you have to look beneath the surface to find out what the underlying coherent movement is. And to try to reduce combined species to elementary counterpoint is a huge mistake. And the more complicated, more complex the situation is with half notes, quarter notes, and then tied half notes, the more complex the voice leading will become, and the more prolonged setting or the more prolonged attributes of this you have to consider. Now, I bring that up because we are now going to hear some piano music. Are you prepared? Do you want to play?
Oh.
Will you play?
What piece?
The little Chopin A major prelude.
Okay.
Will you play that? Otherwise, I'll have a recorded example.
I'll play it.
Okay. All right. Well, this is a step away from music. Why would that not actually be music yet? I mean, what key is this in? See, that's a problem with 2-bar examples in a counterpoint book. But this is fairly obvious, I think, yeah? It's got to be one or another. If we just take that note and this and forget about that and add that, what is it?
Do.
No, yes. Okay? It could conceivably be envisioned as some kind of La minor or whatever. But I would hear this, I do hear this in Do major. Okay? Right? I think so. All right, now we're going to turn to the world of Chopin. And I'm calling upon you to help me because... Okay, now this is not a musical performance. Oh, by the way, you have to, I mean, it's impossible for him to play unmusically, I think, but I don't know. What we do in here is not interpretive analysis. I don't think that's a valid expression, actually. And there are reasons why. But what we do in here is to try to explore what it is your mind might be doing when you hear music and also when you create it, right? And you should be able to create it, just like you create sentences. And the sentences that you create more than likely have never been spoken before, although they contain elements that everyone has used at some point. So it is an aspect of the creative property of the human mind. You with me? And there are two aspects to that. And this is one of Chomsky's big points, but I think it is also, you know, if you think about this clearly enough, it has makes a great deal of sense. He says that there are two things that language possesses. The person that possesses linguistic knowledge has a sense of competence, and there is a sense of performance. The competence has to do with the internal state of your grammar or linguistic ability, and it is not something that is learned. You can use the word acquired, but it's not something that is learned. You don't come into the world and language is out there, and you're bombarded by the stimulus, and then you learn through repeated learning or machine learning or whatever it is to associate something with something else. That is not the way language works. Now, so a child comes into the world, and it is not a blank slate. It is pre-equipped to do certain things. So it's essentially growth and maturation. So when a baby comes into the world, its arms begin to develop, right? And its internal organs begin to develop. The arms don't turn into wings, right? and the heart doesn't turn into a brain. So the genome is predetermined innately to produce a human being. So there are certain things that are specified. It is very difficult for a lot of people to realize that the brain has that kind of organization. So it is genomically structured to acquire certain things. And human mental capacities are a specific type of capacity. And so there's something in the brain that allows you to acquire language, your native language, or if you live in a household with 3 different languages spoken, you can potentially acquire those as natural languages. But everything is not specified. Just only parameters or certain principles are innately organized. Then it becomes a matter of growth and maturation. So first, learn the prosodic structure, pick up the prosodic structure of a language. And that is dependent upon what? It's the one thing that has to be there. Yeah, well, a prosodic structure is rhythm. But how is rhythm produced in language? Banging on a can? No.
Well, it takes a bit of time to say words.
Okay, it's something that unfolds in time, yes, is expressed in time. So that implies what?
And a connection between them.
Yes.
Counterpoint.
What? This is something that's got to be innately specified. It has to do with rhythm. And it's long since been recognized, at least in the past 20 years, that it is the rhythmic cues, or the prosodic cues, that the child first uses to determine the parameters to be set in that language. Why is that so? So what has to be innately specified in order for that to happen? What exists in the prosodic cue? What determines the prosodic cue?
Sound.
Oh, okay. A sound is a representation of this.
Oh.
But what are the elements of the sound?
Phonemes.
What is the element of the phoneme? Or the syllable?
Consonants and vowels.
Yes, of course. Consonants and vowels. That must be specified. Well, you say, well, what consonants, what vowels? They're different in different languages. That may be true. The sound element might be different, right? However, but the concept of strong and weak as relating to vowels and consonants is predetermined or innate. That right there would probably eliminate, I think it effectively does, the idea that the mind is a blank slate and that the information is just simply programmed into the brain. Those things are predetermined. There might be other things. And in a child's brain, an infant's brain, it's quite possible that you could have multiple parameters or recognize multiple prosodic structures. Like the young student that I have. Her parents speak Hindustani, her father is a native English speaker, and we're going to add an uncle that speaks Finnish, right? She does speak those 2 languages fluently, the English and the Hindustani, but she could also have acquired Finnish in a natural way so that she would grow up speaking 3 native languages. Once you pass the threshold of about age 2, those parameters are set and you can continue to acquire languages, but they will always have some kind of foreign element to it. Now, how many of you acquired a second language when you were tiny? Well, naturally, I would think, yes. Most people don't, at least in Atlanta, Georgia, they don't. Okay. All right, so I maintain that music is a system that is related to language in that way. There are aspects of music that are predetermined in our brain to acquire musical knowledge. The musical knowledge that is in there is, of course, has to mature and it has to grow. But there are things that are set. And so what is it that would be set? Would be some kind of prosodic cue. And in music, and in all musics, I maintain that it is what? This distinctions between consonance and dissonance. And that's a very rudimentary concept. And it can be worked out in a number of different ways. And it actually does have zero to do with the particular sound system or tuning in music, right? Those are elements that may be specific to a particular musical system, but there is no way getting around the fact that you must have something that is represented as consonance and dissonance. Now, many people who do not agree with that idea. There are a lot of people that do not agree with the idea that the mind is innately structured in any way, or it is modular in terms of its mental functions. But that's been pretty much dismantled. But there is the engine of dogma that persists, and it makes it very difficult for some people to realize that there can be that kind of structure in the brain. Now, in our very superficial, I think, discussion of evolutionary science, there are some ideas that probably contribute to the notion that the brain is not innately specified in some way or has a priori structures. But we won't get in that again today. All right, now, so Michael is generous enough to play this little Chopin prelude. And it is in A major, I'll give you that. So play an A. Yeah, okay. All right, that's some kind of an A. Now he's going to play this, and I would like for you to see if you could figure out the form of this piece, and also the sonorities that you hear in it. Play. Okay, that's beautiful. Now, yes. Okay. Well, the first thing I'd like to do is to ask you, what are the chords in this? I hate that word. What are the sonorities you hear in this?
E7, A,
Well, you do hear an A major chord, right? Which would be called a 1 chord, yes?
Yeah.
And then you hear a what? And you hear a 5. You hear anything else in it?
3,
Two.
Yeah, there's a 2 in it.
There's definitely
What else?
6, 7, 5, 9.
That's something new. All right, there are like ninths in here, yes? A lot of these sonorities have ninths on them, sevenths and ninths. So the level of dissonance or surface dissonance is extremely, it's virtually every single sound that comes to a rest or whatever is a dissonant chord on the surface. Well, actually, the whole thing is essentially dissonant. The only non-dissonant element in this is what?
the last chord.
The tonic, whatever that is. Virtually everything else in this little expression is dissonant. Do you perceive it as dissonant?
No.
I don't think you do. It sounds pretty kind of bland to me, but it's incredibly beautiful. Yeah? But it's dissonant. All right. Well, let's look at the melodic structure. Do you all know this? Can you all do it without having Michael to struggle through this? It's extremely technically difficult to play. It actually is, right? And he's doing a lovely job. All right, give me the melodic structure of this. Now, I'm not going to do repeated notes, right? By the way, what meter is this in?
3.
Did you know that beforehand? Was that a priori, innately structured in your brain? Now the piece is in 3/4. Forget that, okay? All right, so we've got this. Then what else?
Re, mi, la. Re sharp.
Uh-oh. I'm thinking ahead. Okay. Right? Isn't that the first unit? Am I not right? Okay. Is that literally what the melody is? Look at that. It spans about 2 octave registers. Yeah? Okay. Now, let's try to reduce this to some kind of basic structure. The 2 things that are ubiquitous in music are octave equivalencies, right? And also the notion of consonance and dissonance, right? Some people would disagree with that, but with me, don't disagree with it. Okay, so figure this out in terms of A major.
Do, si, la.
I don't know.
Uh,
Is this E? Let's put that there, okay? All right. Then this D is what? That's a dissonance, yes? Right? Where might that be coming from?
E above.
Maybe, yes, okay? All right, now, that is a consonance or a dissonance?
Against the E of consonant.
Well, remember we're in A, yes? So that has to be a what? Dissonance, yes, okay? Now, what is that?
Upper and lower neighbors.
Is that consonant or dissonant?
Consonants.
Yeah, in the melodic sense here, it is consonant. What about that?
Dissonance.
The D is a dissonance, yeah? Okay, well, we're not going too far here. All right, so if we just hear this, where's the movement in this? Can you play just the melody? Well, okay, if you can't hear this, well, there's something wrong. You hear that moving from here to there, right? And that's an active note. This is a consonant note in terms of A, right? And then keep playing from there. Stop. Right? Go back to the B. F sharp. Are these notes connected? Does this change somewhere in here? Yeah. Is this B fulfilled? Play the melody again. Where do you feel like the tension has come out of this?
Because it's resolving down to A.
The last note.
That? Well, for sure, yeah. But don't you think there's a release here?
Yeah.
Yeah, play it one more time. Right, at the E, the tension is resolved. So we might be able to think of this as that note, right, as being related to that. Yes? Okay? So that would be the consonants in A, the smallest consonants, la, do. That is a dissonance, right? So this would be essentially like a passing tone, right? Well, something happens here. Things get turned upside down in the melody, and this note, which is down here somewhere, right, is projected up an octave, right? Because you definitely hear that connected, yes? So this A really should be there, and that is the first closed off unit. All right, now, how can we accommodate these notes inside that register?
I don't know. I hear the E is related to the
That,
E, the next note.
that,
I don't know. I always feel like it's related to the do.
yeah, well it is, right? I think that's sustained, yeah? Okay, so there's been some kind of exchange here. That's moved up, yeah? I'm pretty sure. All right, well now how to explain the rest of this?
F sharp is consonant, right?
So this would be mi, re, do, actually, right? All right, this is chromaticized, all right? Okay? All right, now what about, there's another tone in here that we're missing.
B sharp.
Or, well, B, yeah, or B sharp. Doesn't this occur with that? Yes? So this is actually coming from what? Yes? Forget the accidentals, yeah? That has to be related to this. Okay, now what about the F sharp? I think that is there, right? Because that's a, I think you definitely hear that. Isn't it mi, fa, mi? Mi, fa. What if we put, yeah, mi, fa, mi. What else is in here?
Well, do, re, mi.
Play the whole thing now.
Melody would be.
Mm-hmm. No, the whole thing with the bass. All right, now leave out the left hand. Is there a G sharp in here? Yeah, okay. All right, now keep going. All right, so where does the F sharp come from? Does it come from E?
So
Comes from the G, doesn't it? Okay, so this moves here, right? And that is what creates what?
Transform consonants.
Yes. Over what note? E, over E, yes? So you have E, G sharp, and F, right? Okay? The G sharp would be the 10th or the 3rd. The F sharp is the 9th, yes? Okay, it's a passing tone, dissonance. And it's inside of this. So it's G, F sharp, E, right? And that is delayed by this. Yeah? Are you following all this? Okay. All right. So let's play it one more time. The whole thing. Now, I think you understand from all the momentum or the tension that's in here, amplified by this third, right, that produces the ninth. This is all resolved here. And what note carries the resolution? Is it E? Is it A? Is it C sharp? It's A, yes? So this is represented by the descending third. I maintain that even in the disguising of this fundamental motion, you still hear it. And all of these things are octave transpositions, notes moving around inside of the sonority. That is prolonged counterpoint. So it takes this kernel progression, which is, you can't have any of this comprehensively without having that progression. Then this melody unfolds in many voices, moving above and below, and it comes to rest here. Now, there's something peculiar about this. What is the first metrical pause in this? Play it again. Is that sound connected to the metrical pause on the 7, 5, 7? Is the D and the F sharp that you hear, is that connected to this?
Probably not.
And one note sustains, one note moves, technically, right?
It sounds more like a pickup to me.
Oh.
Just listen.
Yeah, but there is a contrast between the meter and the rhythm. The meter is not the rhythm. The meter sits on the top, and it has another level of organization. Play it one more time. See, the resolution of the rhythm comes when you move to the Do sharp, yes? Or the A, right? So this is actually going. Isn't that what that's doing? Right? All right. So this is all connected to the dominant chord, the E chord here. And so is the F sharp. That's coming out of this, right? So musically, rhythmically, there is no break at all. That's a break that's imposed as a kind of rhetorical or metrical break, right? Has nothing to do with the tonal rhythm, right? So when I speak, you understand what the prosodic rhythm is, right? You see what I'm doing, yeah? If you were to really consider those pauses in my speech as representing some kind of authentic articulation, you would not be able to understand what I'm saying. There's a distinct difference between the metrical organization and the rhythmic organization. Meter is not rhythm. Meter imposes a level of activity that can either coincide with the rhythm or it can contradict it. I mean, what composer does that to great advantage? Brahms, right? And that's a source of, pleasure or of, titillation or whatever you want to call it, right? It adds a dimension to the music, right? But it has nothing to do with the fundamental rhythmic structure. There are many places that in Brahms where you see that. You can't go too long in any composition of his without seeing that. And it's not unique to Brahms either. But, well, look at this, right? Okay, let's keep going. We're only, it's like Karen Carpenter. We've only just begun, okay? All right, so is that what you call that the first phrase? Well, when it gets to this, you certainly do. So it's do, si, la, right? Okay, play it again and go to the second phrase. Oh dear, play that second phrase again. Okay, they go back to the last chord in the first segment. Stop. Now, do those two things connect? I think that they do connect. Although there is a break, a superficial phrasal break, right? So, wait a minute. Now, that makes me think that there's something funny going on at the beginning. Is that part of the tonic harmony, or is that part of the dominant harmony?
Yes.
All right, let's play it once again. From the beginning. Okay, now, two things. In retrospect, that sets up the C sharp. I think that this beginning note belongs to the tonic. The second phrase actually confirms that. Now, I know what the music says, and Chopin does mark that E in the C sharp in the next phrase. He slurs it into the next, right? For obvious reasons, right? But the sonority that's underneath that is definitely held over from the A. There's a change of pedal at the very last minute. But the pedal, am I not correct, doesn't extend until that note is actually played? Yes. Play the end of the first phrase. Yes, right? So the pedal extends, lets go at the, it stops right there. At the very last, this is not a coaching, but okay. So it should be released right before that, right? You extend that. So obviously, at least to me, that's coming out of the tonic chord. Now, what about the second, so-called second phrase? Yeah, that's really great. Okay, all right. So we've got that, right? Okay. Then this note is recaptured, right? The C sharp has to be there. All right, again, the second phrase. Play again? I didn't hear that. Oh, yeah. What's on the top there? Z flat, right? It's Do sharp, right? Right? Yes? Then we've got something else in there. And then it goes to B again, yes? Okay? Well, actually it goes to D. Doesn't it do the same thing that's done here? It's trying to. Yes, keep going. Isn't that it? Do, si, la, and do. Okay? So that is the second recursion. Okay? All right, let's keep going. Oh, wait a minute. Is that the same chord as you got when the bass comes in here?
Voiced a little different.
What is it? Play it again. Is that the first? Play the first phrase. Now play this. What does that sound?
You just bring the G sharp a little earlier.
Yeah, but isn't there a C sharp on the top? Mi, sol, sharp, do, right?
It isn't.
That's a different sound,
6 to
yes?
5 though, isn't it?
What?
It's just a 6 to 5, isn't it?
I don't know.
Or the E.
Yeah, I think it is 6 to 5, right? Okay? Now play the first phrase again. Now play this phrase. Is that what happens over here? Is that the same thing that happens over here? Okay, so initially, if I consider this as a tonic chord, what is the relationship of this to that?
Half step.
Play C sharp, E, G sharp with the C sharp on top. Play C sharp in the bass. Now, make the G sharp go to an A. Right? That's the relationship. Okay? All right. So let's go. That's not the same as this, I don't think. All right, go on. Okay, well, finally, something new and revolutionary, right? So, this does that again, right? And this, but this time, what happens to this? It goes way up in this register, right? So it's La and then Do sharp. So it's Do, that's been changed up an octave, right? Okay? Now, what is this sonority that's here? Play one more time. What is that? What's happened? I'm going to put this here, right? What's the motion in the bass?
Down through.
To F sharp.
F sharp, yes. All right, what is the relationship of this to that?
5, 6.
It's that, yes? So we've got that, and then we have this, and that's on page 9,473 of the harmony book, right? And what is this? That's simply a displacement of the A major chord, right? What is the displacement? It's that, yes? Okay. Now, the obfuscating thing, or the obscuring thing, is that. Yes? Okay.
And the 7th.
Yes, and then, well, where's the 7th?
E.
Right. So this is magically that, right? 8/7. Yes? Okay. So that is how that sonority appears there. Okay, now what comes after that? Okay, so help me out here. I've forgotten what that is.
Sharp.
We'll play it one more time. Tell me what the motion in the bass is. Okay, what happens here? And what happens in the top voice?
C.
Dun-dun. Yes? That's what I mean, top voice, not what's actually there. Okay? Play it one more time. What comes after that?
E in the bass.
So what is actually this chord? It's that, isn't it? Okay? And then this is, it's still a seventh, yes? Okay? And where do you want me to put it?
Down.
Down here? Okay. All right. So that's one, that's two. That is no break in the structure, right? That's seventh, so it's automatically going to continue on. You hear it as continuing. But the metrical structure puts a pause there. So, you know, I've read analyses of this piece that says that this is 5 of 2, and then it goes to 5. So this becomes an harmonic progression, right? But this has no harmonic significance, does it? What is it? It's a 5 to 6 over the main tone here, right? So the fact that there's a metrical pause here coincides with the fact that nothing has happened in here, right? And then it does move to the final passing tone, and that is prolonged by both that tone and that tone. Okay, so now one final thing. What is the bass structure of this? We'll say that, okay? And that, right? Then this, that, then this, then that, yeah? So, considering that that is there, it goes 1, degree 1, degree 5, degree 1, degree 5, degree 1, degree 1, or whatever, 5, 1, degree 6, right? Then 2, 5, 1, okay? Now, I think that these degrees in the bass, most people consider them harmonies, right? Let's see if we can find out another explanation for this, a contrapuntal explanation. This is actually inside of that. We've already discussed that, yeah? So that explains that. All right, what about this? Where does that come from?
Consonant.
Yeah, if you put this here, right, then you know that that is 5 to 6. Yeah? Okay. So that's a contrapuntal motion. What about the B?
Passing.
It's coming up from A.
Maybe
Down.
not from C.
What?
Well, it's going to A. Probably coming from a do. C.
Do, Si, La?
Yeah.
It could. Absolutely.
Like do, si, do,
Okay.
si.
So we have La, and we have Do here. And that would go Do, Si, La. Look at there. It's parallel octaves, right? We could say that it's coming up from la, si, do, which gets rid of the parallel octaves. Nonetheless, this is a passing tone from either the third that is going down or going up, right? Okay? That's a passing tone. And what happens here? It just so happens that that's inside of that, right? So technically, which is the more dissonant of these chords?
B.
What?
B.
Yes. The B is more dissonant, right? But it is standing in some kind of fifth relationship to the other tone. But its contrapuntal function and its origin is in a passing motion, yeah? So these two things are transformed consonances, and they prolong one single tone, the passing tone in the upper voice. And you hear the rhythm, the contrapuntal rhythm, stall out here. It's the thing that actually makes the pauses, the rhythm, the metrical pauses in all of these phrases kind of bear fruit. It gets incredibly slow at the end. Now play the whole thing again and see if you can hear it that way. Is it clear what I'm trying to say? Okay. You hear that? It's hard to hear, maybe. I don't know. This for a piece that's not but what, 16 bars long or 15 bars, whatever it is. I think it's pretty complicated, right? And the rest of the preludes in that set are a lot more complicated than that. Okay. All right, thank you, Michael, very much. I appreciate it. All right, now, you all have your books. In the, I think it's in the, it's in the first chapter, and it is on the, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5th page, something like that. You all, most of you have the, it's printed back to, on both sides. And at the bottom of that, it's the paragraph that starts, the grammar of music, of a music. I'm counting, front and back as 1 and 2. Got it?
Oh.
You got it? All right. So let's read together. No, don't read together. Let's follow along. The grammar of a music is actually the system of principal phenomena that specifies the relation of meaning to sound. Now, when I use the word meaning, I don't mean, some kind of how red is red or qualia or anything like that. I'm talking about the syntactical meaning, that is, its place in the system, how it relates to other elements of the structure. That is what syntax is. Yep. A musician produces an auditory signal. The listener receives this signal and attempts to understand or make sense of it. The action of performance, both on the part of the musician and the hearer, is undoubtedly a very complex issue, more complex in some than others. But we are assuming that they both possess some sort of knowledge that allows this action of performance to function. At some level, then, the mind must possess an explanatory system. It is the grammatical knowledge that provides the assumed connection between the sound and the meaning. And once again, meaning is an abstract idea. It means what are the meaning of the symbols in relationship to one another, syntactical relationships, for each musicalistic expression. In Chomskyan terms, as well as here, this internal grammatical knowledge is competence. It is this sense of competence that determines potential performance skill. In this manner, musical competence, sorry for that slip, competence is the internalization of the principal phenomena of this grammar that allows the musician to produce and interpret musicalistic expressions which have never been created before. It is this grammar and the competence that yields the creative aspect of performance. As Chomsky and Morris Hawley suggest, the internalization of the grammar, quote, is not generalized from prior experience, nor is it learned by habit or conditioning behavior. It is an internally generated mental state of a represented system. Now, to most people, those would be fighting words, because even most of the people in the music cognition world would disagree with this. They would maintain that music has no sense of compositionality, that it has no sense of elements or parts of speech like grammar or like language. But I think that anyone would recognize that there are no such things as nouns or verbs. But there are elements like that function similarly in music. And my theory is predicated on those things being true, and that there being a kind of internalized state of the grammar that then contributes to the ability or the performance ability. So, my son, my stepson, he's like a son to me, but stepson came over to the house in Bedford on Saturday, and he helped me move all the palms and the ficus tree and this giant Norfolk palm into the house. And he is currently studying at the Herbert Berghoff School, acting school in New York. And he was very excited because he came in about this and was talking about this exercise that they did in their class. And the teacher was really, really, really hard on everybody in the class, and that it was very difficult to pass this exercise. Well, the exercise it's an Uta, you know who Uta Hagen was? Actress. Did they use that book in their acting class?
I did.
You did? Fantastic. There's an exercise in there that is called immediacy. And it's a fantastic exercise. And perhaps next week we'll do that exercise. And it's an interesting exercise because one of the elements in that Uta Hagen thought was necessary in acting is that you don't anticipate things. That an actor must never anticipate the outcome, even though you obviously know what's going to happen. And why would you not want to anticipate that? Because it's a couple of things. It immediately falsifies the action, does it not? I mean, it loses all of its energy that way. And the other thing is, what? It becomes incredibly boring, right? Amazingly boring. Now, he was telling me about this. Of course, he passed it with flying colors. But he said there was another person in the class who he thought was a really good actress, but just couldn't get it. Had great difficulty in not communicating through gesture or whatever what was going to be coming next. It's a really hard thing to do. And I got to thinking about it, and I thought, well, gosh, I think that has incredible relevance to musical performance, does it not? Now, you think about that for a minute. I want you to think about it. In what ways is that a profound and valid idea? And in what other ways does it not exactly? There might be things that don't exactly work with that idea, but should work. But there are other complications in it. Let's think about that for a minute. All right, you sit down to play piece X, right? And it sounds like it's written for, 3 people, and you're only one, and you have to play it, okay? And it's another piece that people are familiar with. In other words, it's an established canonical work. Let's even say that. All right? So how does the sense of immediacy apply to that? And how would it not apply? What interferes with that? What would contribute to promoting a sense of immediacy in your performance, and what are the other things that are pulling against it or contradicting that?
The listener's knowledge of the piece might be contradicting that.
Yeah, but if you go to a Shakespeare play or an Edward Albee play or Eugene O'Neill play, people are going to be familiar with that.
The actor's familiarity with how the piece goes? Or the performers?
Well, obviously you have to know that. The whole exercise in immediacy is being able to act as though you don't know what the outcome is going to be in the situation.
I feel like you just kind of are dealing with the expectation of the audience. Like, in different contexts, you either feel like music is all about either fulfilling or defying expectation, and there's a balance of both.
Well, okay, the expectation, I think, is an element of the language or the grammar itself, right?
Of the music itself.
Right. So, I mean, that's a given. That's a different type of thing. But it is true that when you are listening to someone speak, you have to have a sense of expectation that is built into the grammar and the syntax itself, because that builds up the ability to create a gestalt or the image or the coherence in what the person is saying. Right? That's actually what a baby picks up. The first thing he picks up, and that is communicated through the prosodic cues. So that's a given, but let's put that aside.
It should seem like what you're talking about is just a spirit of improvisation within the music, like that it's coming, it's living in the moment.
Yeah, as though it were happening for the first time,
Yeah.
right? Now, I've said this is one of my favorite quotes from Willa Cather. I think it's from, I've forgotten what the novel is from, but I do remember that she is the matriarch of the family, and she's standing in the field and she's talking to the Lutheran minister. And she says, there are only a few human stories and they keep repeating themselves over and over again as though they've never happened before. Well, do you think that's true? Yeah, I think it's really true. It's definitely true. And I think that something like that must happen in acting in order for it to be convincing, because you know that it's acting, right? But you should be drawn into the experience as though that person in that situation is being created on the spot. That's how you were drawn into the action. Well, how is that possible in a musical context?
It's the same.
Think deeply about this. Think of the components that are necessary when you get up and go on the stage to perform a piece of music.
Maybe you should have a look of terror on your face as if you've never played the piece before.
I don't know if it's appropriate, right?
Well, this may be completely off the mark, but there's always the idea of the breath or the upbeat. You can't sit down to play the Appassionata Sonata or something and just, not move and then all of a sudden play the first note. There's always a preparatory gesture.
Well, I do think that breath is a vital part of it, right? You have to engage the breath. You have to start. I think it's extremely important, particularly in an orchestral performance, right? Everyone must initiate the life together in a piece. That's a critical factor. As a matter of fact, that is what makes an orchestral performance electric or live, is the fact that everyone begins to breathe simultaneously. That's a critical fact. I used to make a big deal out of that. Rita, never mind, it doesn't matter. But I think that's a critical factor. Well, think about this. The idea of immediacy. Then one of the exercise is that, and we're going to do this. Maybe I shouldn't give the exercise away, but I will. But it's an exercise where the class sits there and observes a person that doesn't really know something interact or try to perform this action. And then at the end, and the class observes this person doing this. And then at the end, and after the task is accomplished, they ask the person to do it again. And they know what's going to happen. But they ask the class, the teacher asks the class, to register and look at the expressions and the body language and the motions in that person again and see what the difference is between those two. The first time, the participant didn't know how it was going to end. The second time, they do know. And so, what is the difference between the two responses? And it's very revealing, I think. So how does that apply to music? You've played X Prelude and Fugue 5 million times. How are you going to communicate that as though you've never played it before?
You have to be intensely in that, like, completely devoted to the present moment.
Well, how do you do that?
You just do it.
Yeah, well, okay.
I think part of it, I guess, is knowing. You do have to sort of know exactly before, you have to prepare to the point where you know exactly what it is that is in the music music when you're playing it, so that when you play it, you can, like, you don't have to think about that, and it can just sort of come out. Like the specific content of what you do happens like in the moment, but you can't do that without like no. I guess it's like a weird contradiction.
Well, yeah, that is the contradiction.
Like, you have to know like exactly how. I guess in the acting series, you have to know exactly how the scene plays out, like second to second. But when you actually do it, like because you know it that well, you can sort of just let it happen, and then the emotional content or whatever will be different each time.
Well, so there are two
Assuming.
components.
Like-
Well, all right. So that is the contradiction in that. Is music a skill?
I
In
think
what sense?
performing is, in a sense.
I feel like it's very
Depends on-
similar to acting. Like I don't really see a lot of difference between performing a piece of music and acting a role. Like in the sense of method act, or like becoming what it is, the thing it is that you're like being the experience of the content. Because you are the character.
But what does that mean?
It depends on what kind of, like, how everyone acts differently. Or, like, some people, some people can just spontaneously do things, and other people find it better if they have everything, every little detail sort of planned out, I guess.
I find that this might be completely off the mark, but I think that like in preparing a piece of acting or a piece of music, there's the level of, there's the text on the page, the notes that you have to play, the rhythms that you have to not screw up and all that. But then once you really get this deeper understanding of the piece, you have, I guess, this higher image in your head, this higher level above it, such that everything you play is just sort of naturally is that way. It's not that you have to put it that way, it's that that's the way it happens. And once you're prepared to the point where you just have all those musical elements happening instead of thinking about how you have to do them, that lends itself to the immediacy that you can provide in a performance.
Okay, well, then there are two things that are involved. Actually, I think in acting also, this is why I think there's such a correlation between this. Is music a skill? Is acting a skill? Is that what I'm talking about?
Depends on how you do each thing.
When you say is music a skill, do you mean is playing music a skill? Because music itself is just music.
Or a
So-
language.
What?
Or a language of some sort.
Yeah, so it's not a skill in that sense. Right? Well, if it's not a skill, what is it? The skill is an aspect of performance, is it not?
I think it's kind of a skill.
I think it's a property of the brain, and it's a skill in that it's something that our brains are capable of doing and processing in the same way as many
Yeah,
other
but
things
is
are.
that something that is learned?
But it's something we choose to like exercise at any given moment. Like I think a skill is something you can like feel like crap, but still decide that you want to play music, and like I don't know, it's something that it's a tool. Like doing music.
So do you think of using language as like a skill? Did you acquire language on the basis of acquiring a skill?
I mean, there is the
Use the
phrase language skills, and some people have better
Depends on
language
the
skills than
Well,
others.
I think that's a bogus term.
Does it have to do with
which you
competence?
use
Yes.
language.
Absolutely. It has everything to do with the difference between competence and performance in the sense that I'm talking about. how does someone attain linguistic competence?
They don't.
They don't. It happens. It's a product of growth and maturation, right? If a person is deprived of visual stimulus for a certain period of time, they never develop stereoscopic vision. Likewise, if a person has never heard any primary linguistic data or been exposed to any primary linguistic data before age 2, it's virtually impossible for them to acquire language. The reason why Helen Keller was so fluent was that she went deaf. She was not born deaf, I don't think. She went deaf fairly early. But she had PLD, she had primary linguistic data before she went deaf.
Is there
So,
a way that we could prove that? Because somebody could, argue that cases like her are evidence that you don't need primary linguistic data because we can't, there's no way to show whether or not she had that in her brain before she was able to articulate things.
yeah, it's pretty much confirmed by dissociative things in other people's brains. That's been pretty substantially researched. However, it has been shown that the sensory motor system or the vocal tract or whatever has nothing to do with acquiring language skill. And actually, the specific visual input, you don't have to have that either. But you do have to have a modicum of some kind of experience. Although it's possible through vibration and that kind of stuff that you can perceive enough information to set the parameters. And it shows that those things, it isn't a skill, it's something that's innately structured in your brain. It's not something that you acquire from the outside by practice and repetition. It's not a skill as such. Yes?
I feel like even though language and music are innately programmed to our way the brain functions, I think it is a skill to be able to use that to convey whatever, any kind of meaning, or one uses, some people are more fluent with their linguistic abilities to convey either ideas or to move people, like the intention, to get one using the tool to convey something. I think that's a skill.
I would
Is that a
completely agree, but
talent?
do you think that that's the same thing as like that innate sort of musical, or is it like something else that only some people choose to develop? Or do you think that they're like completely tied together?
I mean, it's sort. You can't just. I agree with this because you can't just sorry, you don't just start out being able to linguistically be able to recite something by Shakespeare or whatever. You know what I mean?
Yes,
Like,
but I
you
would
have the basic innate ability to use it depends. You can use it to say I'm going to the store, or you can use it to say some very complex.
Well, wait a
sentence,
minute.
Which is a skill. Okay.
Wait a minute, but I agree with all of that. But doesn't that relate to what I was talking about, growth and maturation?
Yeah, I
That
think we're talking about two different things.
Yes, definitely. But if you have this innate ability to acquire language, then the growth and maturation part in language refers to the acquisition of greater lexical items and their relations in sentences. and more complex structures that involve more complicated relations between lexical items. Yeah, I do believe that. So that is part of growth and maturation, and that could be an aspect of skill. But the idea is that you have this in the acquisition of language skills. You have very limited data that you're exposed to. And through that very limited set of data, you acquire the fundamentals. And then it's simply a matter of growth and maturation, so that by a certain stage, the linguistic ability reaches a kind of finite stage or end stage. And it just doesn't, you can keep acquiring more lexical items or refine that. But that has nothing to do with the aspect of competence, the ability to acquire the technique itself. If you didn't have that primary linguistic data or primary musical data at an early age, you could never acquire the ability to, use fancy words like acrimonious or whatever, phlegmatic, or whatever word you want to think of, right? Or convolutionary, or use them in the context that is appropriate. So it's not a matter of memorizing a bunch of words. It's a matter of knowing how things fit together and the lexical items themselves, how they fit into the grammatical structure, because they all have, features that can be connected. But the features are the way in which they connect is part of just the language process. Well, I maintain that music is exactly like that, except there's probably a difference in the amount of time that it requires to, the growth and maturation is probably a little longer. For some people, it's much longer. But the idea is that the primary musical data, I think, has to be of a certain character. It has to be primary musical data. And this is where the other idea comes in. Is music a skill? See, I don't think language is a skill. I think the ability to use language is skill related, but that is performance, that is not competence. So in terms of music, what is the competence factor? I mean, even though I might have started playing the piano at age 4, it took me till age 5 until I was able to play the entire piano repertoire. Oh, well, that's a familiar Curtis story. No, but the idea is the nature of the primary musical data. What is it that it takes to kind of set those things?
Is this competence we're talking about just the lack of being tone deaf, basically?
Yes.
Like the ability to hear a piece of music and recognize, not even put a label on it, but just hear
Features.
the consonants and dissonance.
Yes, absolutely. Yes. And if you hear enough of it, it sets parameters. But you have to hear enough of it. And what do you think is the kind of musical stimulus that is most effective in setting parameters for the acquisition of musical competence? What?
Schoenberg.
Gregorian chant.
Closer than the other things you mentioned. Since I'm on television, I can't say
music.
What?
Tonal music.
Well, not only that. You see, all natural musical systems are tonal. I don't care what anyone says, and we're going to hear a piece of Egyptian music in just a minute that proves some of my points, I think. I don't know.
Western
But what specific kind of music or what specific things are required?
Counterpoint.
Western classical music.
Well, something that contains elements of counterpoint in it, which is the clearest way in which you set parameters for the perception of consonance and dissonance.
I have a question. So, I know a lot of people would say they're tone deaf, but they're not actually. But some people truly are tone deaf. Do you think that's a biological property, or is it the lack of having those musical parameters set at a young age?
No, I think I think in the genuine tone deafness is actually rare.
But in those
It's
rare cases,
pathological.
do you think it's biological, or is it?
No, that is biological.
Okay.
That's some kind of a physicality or pathological condition of mental structure or in the auditory system. But it's extremely rare, right? My mother always said she was tone deaf, but she went around singing, the old gospel hymns or whatever, and they were perfectly in tune. So that she's not tone deaf. I mean, there are, I spent most of my life working with amateur choirs, and I never had a situation where, well, maybe I did once or twice, where you had actually a tone deaf person that with, training, you could actually increase some people's musical competence. And remember, competence has to do with the setting of parameters for the perception of consonance and dissonance. I think that's it. So at a very early age, if you're exposed to music that has a high degree of contrapuntal structure, and if you have that kind of sensibility, you will acquire a much higher level of musical competence. What's the other thing that can contribute to that at a very early age? What do you think could contribute to that? The development of musical competence.
I think musicians for parents.
No. Well, I mean, that might have some genetic thing, but that's thin ice.
I mean, like hearing them practice something.
Yeah, okay.
Exposure.
Hearing music and then also the child singing music?
Yes, singing from a very, very early age, particularly the old boring French solfege system. If you sit there and have a person in choir, say I started singing in a choir when I was 4 years old, and we began every single rehearsal. You would write a scale on the board, and with a ruler, and you would point to the notes, and you'd have to sing the solfege, and eventually you would skip around. That is indispensable, and it sets parameters really, really, really early. That's not the only thing. What were the this could be different for everyone, but this is just my own experience. So the singing at a very early age, plus, for some strange reason, I liked organ music. And the first record that I listened to, they didn't make records anymore. This is from like 1910 or whatever, right? That I listened to was Bach Preludes and Fugues played on the organ, right? I listened to that over and over and over and over and over and over again from age 4 on. I listened to a whole bunch of other music too. And I do believe that there is that kind of connection in competence between language and music. But we're kind of drifting off track here, or going off track. So, is music a skill?
Yes and no.
Yes, of course. What is the skill part of it?
Recognizing it.
Like honing it or practicing efficiently or somehow.
So, well, let's go to practicing efficiently. How? What are you practicing? And don't say the music. What are you doing?
The technical aspect.
Yes, you're training like a gymnast, right? So there is a purely physical or motor property to that. That is learning in that kind of mechanical way, right?
I think there's also an element of skill in the creative part of it too.
Well, I don't know whether I would agree with that.
Or at least different gradations of competency, if you want to still
Well,
call it
yes,
that.
okay, I agree with that. But it's not really skill related. In other words, it's not stimulus and response. It's definitely stimulus and response in moving your fingers, putting them in the correct place, or actually putting the vocal cords in the correct place.
I feel like those things are like very directly related, though, at least for me.
Yes, that is what I used to call, many moons ago, the artistic physical. So that whatever the impulse is, and who knows where that comes from, that you are ready and are able to match that with whatever physical property that you have. And obviously, if your fingers are 2x4s or whatever, they're not going to execute the competency, right? So that is the thing, right? Okay. So that's a critical factor, to match that, right? By hearing something internally and matching it with some sensory motor response. That is one thing. But the skill itself, the mechanical part of it, whether it's vocal or using your, sign language. The thing is, when you play an instrument, either a keyboard instrument or a other kind of instrument, right? And you're moving your bow up and down and moving your fingers on the strings, that's equivalent to sign language. And you don't have to actually hear the sound, right? Were there any deaf pianists or deaf organists? Blind and deaf musicians?
I mean,
Yeah.
they tried. Some of them.
Yeah, I think that you can reach a level of mastery at some point where the physical aspect of it is kind of automatic, but that has a connection inside your brain, right? That is the artistic physical. So it connects a mental capacity with the sensory motor system, two different things. So in many respects, the physical act of playing an instrument is similar to sign language. So you don't have to speak in order to have linguistic competence. Sign language, the many sign languages that have been developed, are as complicated, as expressive, and as effective as vocal articulation. Because the competence in itself is a mental thing, and the execution of the language is facilitated through some kind of sensory motor avenue. And it doesn't have to be vocal, it can be anything. It can be gesture, it can be sign language, or whatever.
So
You related this in past lessons to, you called it the phonotactic system.
Yes, that's the sensory motor system. That's the sound system, right? However, what happened to Beethoven's phonotactic system?
Became much more tactic and much less phono.
Yes, I would answer that by saying nothing happened to it, right? He just went deaf, apparently. But it had absolutely no effect on his ability to hear, create, or perform music.
well, apparently it had an impact on his ability to conduct music.
Well, yeah, because that is input, output, right? Or output, input, whatever, right? And, all right, that brings up another topic. Okay, so is it clear about what we're talking about in terms of competence versus skill. So there is as Michael said, some kind of contradiction there. However, it's quite easy to assume that music is a skill. Yeah?
I was going to add something. Well, there's also an element of it's also assuming that you're only performing music that you have some sort of connection to. Like, because if you're not, then there's always going to be like 2% that's not entirely sincerely expressed, that you sort of have to create artificially.
Well, that's where acting comes into it.
That's like, yeah, it's like only assuming that you totally understand, like on a mental and emotional level, everything going on in whatever you're playing.
I think that's true. However, when I was in school back in the 1400s, you know, I played a lot of contemporary music, and a lot of it was impossible to, at least I thought, to make any sense out of. However, I made sense out of it. I don't know whether it was what the composer intended, but you have to act as though it made sense.
Artificial skill, I guess.
Well, I don't think. Well, I
not
think.
just like that's more like a mental process than an.
Well, yes, it is. I think it is.
I think there are certain musical skills, like, for instance, Michael being able to sight read anything. That's a skill. Or like, but I'm not sure that's related to. Of course, when you create it, or that's related to the innate musical structure in our brain, but the certain things I think are skills that are developed and can be executed.
Well, skill is something that is developed and can be executed.
Yeah,
That's
for
for
instance,
sure.
even like, I mean, what you said, like whatever we use to represent that structure, we have to practice speaking or to be able to articulate words or to
Yeah, but what if?
reading.
But is
instead
it
of-
possible? Is it possible for? Well, reading is a skill, right?
Yeah, and that's what I mean. I think there are certain things that are associated with music, like broad music making, that are skills, like comparable to being able to read text, because it's related to the structure of our brain, but it's not necessarily innately. That's gained through practice. And
Yeah, but that's not that. I would say that is not related to the acquisition of linguistic competence.
Yeah, but it's it's another. I'm just saying that maybe the reason why it's hard to answer that question is because we group in those skills with the competence.
Right. And what's the danger of that? Now we're getting somewhere.
That
Which
you
is
don't
what
have
you've
the
always.
skills, then
What?
people assume you're not competent.
Yes. You have all these things that said music is A, B, C, D, E, F, G, right? And it has nothing to do with music. It has to do with the skill, the mechanical aspect of it. And I agree. Who wants to hear, you know, a person that is not skilled trying to play
Anything.
anything? That's good, right? But on the other hand, if that is the focus, if that is the main directive, what happens? The competency atrophies. It doesn't mean it disappears. It just atrophies. So, what should be the primary focus in a musician's training?
Not getting incompetent.
Depends on what point they are in their study. I think for a good while, most of us need to focus on building enough skill that our competence will continue to grow.
I think that it's the other way around.
Really.
Yep. I think it's absolutely the other way around. You think about, well, I just think that it's the other way around.
I think
That
Well-
if you are so driven by something in you to do music that you will invent the skill, and that has been borne out in children who have just spontaneously created their own language or their own sign languages. There are many things like that. So burning is the desire to do that they are actually able to create it themselves.
yeah.
And so there is a point where the competency has to match absolutely the skill, and that has to be developed. You're right about that.
But so if we're talking about us, young students in conservatory, trying to really do this, I mean, yeah, it's all well and good if you invented a method of how to play the piano when you were 5, but at some point we need to sort of be in line with the established approach in some ways so that we can play all of the literature.
Well, but those two things that you said, I don't think necessarily go together, right?
I mean, once we hit a certain age, it will become virtually impossible, I think, to gain the skills or to further the skills to a certain extent.
I'm not sure that's true unless I initially learned to play the piano that way. Carl Schachter can play with the hands turned upside down like that. It was amazing, right? He couldn't play the, Opus 11 Etudes, but he could play that way. But I mean,
I think that what you're that like in art, there's no way getting around that we're going to be influenced, or that things have been done before and that it exists, and I think that has a great subconscious effect. But I feel like unless you're chasing an ideal in your head or something that like that your ability is always trying to reach the ideal, instead of there being an ideal that's imposed, or an idea that I have to try to do that's detached from an inner drive, then it's very difficult to actually improve, in a natural way. But I think those, for instance, great musicians that have been around before, that's the reason why we're able to perceive that's related to our own individual ideal. There's no way of getting rid of that influence.
but it is internal. So what you're saying, I think, is absolutely correct. You have to do certain things to acquire a skill, but that is somehow fundamentally different from the acquisition or the development of competence, I think. It's a tricky thing, and I don't know, what are the components of developing musical competence? Unfortunately, it's this, right? Because that's the way, sound is conducted, right? Or the impression of sound. It's not even sound. You must understand that it's just vibratory. It's a mechanical wave, a periodic vibratory wave or whatever, that's analyzed in some very specific way by the neural structure of your brain. And it creates the percept of sound. There's no such thing as actual sound. In human beings, and in all animals to a certain degree, it is a mental percept. It's an activity of neurons. It just is. I mean, and so the sound part of it is expressed in language, and in musical language is different. I mean, it's abstract. And so I mentioned this the other day in class. When you listen to the Eroica, the first movement of the Eroica Symphony, and you've got an audience sitting there, and you go up to those people and say, did this begin the same way that it ended? And most people would say, yeah, I think so. But now, to get them to play the tonic at the beginning, and then play through the piece, and then have them sing the tonic at the end, and ask them, is that exactly the same pitch? Very few people can do that. You can take a small melody, and a lot of people can't really retain what the tonic is, specifically the pitch. But they can perceive the gestalt of the coherence, of the tonality. That means that there is some kind of abstract operation going on. And the same thing is true with language. I can talk, which I usually do, for a very long time, and you will not remember what the first word I said was.
In this case, it was I.
What?
In this case, it was I.
Yeah, it was I.
And I can talk.
But you will know what I've been talking about, yes? So the cognitive people that think that there's no such thing as the ability to remember pitch or whatever, well, that might be true, but that has nothing really specifically to do with the perception of musical coherence. It's abstract. All right, let's do one other thing and I'll let you go. We're going to hear some Egyptian music played on flute number 97432 or whatever. Do you have your little things from last week?
Nope.
I think it's the second one down. Egypt. You see it?
I will. I have to negotiate with this Wi-Fi for a moment.
Okay.
Yeah, the second table of contents are on the Discovery app.
On the Discovery app. No. Yeah. I think, isn't that the second one down?
Fourth one down now. Oh, second one down from the start of the Egypt. Yeah.
Yeah. And then there is a no, that's not it.
Okay.
No. Yeah, that's it. And what does it say? Sound.
Of ancient Egypt.
Sounds of ancient Egypt. Now it's that flute and use the MP3, right?
Actually.
Okay. Now before you play it, you all have this thing from last week? Well, this is I think flute number 69817. And it's one that was diatonic.
Is that the one on the top right?
What?
Is that the one on the top?
Yes, right. Okay? And it has the scale A, B, C, D, E, F sharp, G, A. That's like a minor scale, but it's what?
Dorian.
Dorian-ish.
Well, as close to Dorian as you can get without precision.
And raise 6. Stop. All right. What is that pitch? Anybody know? What is it? It's kind of a lie, yeah?
Oh, Dies Irae.
This sounds like a voice.
Do it again. Stop. Right. What is the first interval? It's a minor third, right? Okay? So the middle tone, whatever you want to call it, is, the dissonance in between those two tones. Let's play it one more time. Keep going. All right. Now, what do you hear in that? the second tone that you hear, it has a pattern, right? Da 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 da, right? And then the second pattern begins on the passing tone, right? Okay. Keep going. Barely. Okay.
Helps.
All right. That's the Egyptian flute. Apparently, that is a really old instrument, and that particular type of flute has been played for like 3,000 years, right? And the tuning, or the whatever you want to call it, it's not something that you normally hear today. I heard a lot of that in my youth orchestra, but right? But it's clearly diatonic, right? I mean, and that's the point, right? That it's diatonic, and that it has those specific relations. And if you look, and we went over this last week, and if you look at the ratios, not the frequency, but the frequency ratios, you can see why some of those tones sound a little off. But basically, if you take those numbers and you compare them to the derivation of the diatonic pitches that I give, they're very close to it. And that's just intonation, yes.
You know how they send artifacts of like great art and things like that into space? Like they send a Beethoven symphony into space and say like
Not the manuscript.
say an intelligent alien life. See that? And like we're smart enough to act like understand analytically, like, oh wow, look at or analyze structure, or be able to organize the tones, but wouldn't it be? I think we send it up because it means something, but the meaning is very based on like that. That can't be. There's no way to record that, So isn't it kind of
What do you mean there's no way?
There's no way to. Like the fact that we feel something when we hear a scale, or these relationships, isn't that very like uniquely biological to us? Or like those are laws that are governed by our existence as a species?
Well, there are laws that are governed by physics.
Yeah.
Properties, universal properties.
But all the same, the effect it has on us and the way.
Yeah, but that's
it doesn't have the
something
same
totally
significance.
different.
It has meaning because we attribute meaning to it. It's like
The fact that
See,
our
that's-
brain is able to process it, we don't know, not knowing anything about said alien species, maybe their brain doesn't have that ability.
Yeah,
Maybe
but if
it
it's
has a
rooted,
different ability.
if
We don't
those
process
relationships are
religious
rooted
knowledge.
in physical laws, then they're, that's something else. Meaning, I mean, the discussion of meaning is something is basically incoherent.
Yeah.
I meaning only in the sense of syntactical relationships between objects or things or symbols. That is how I define meaning. I'm not defining I mean, in human beings, the conceptions of words have a modular characteristic. It has all kinds of properties to it, visual elements to it, sonic elements to it, emotional elements to it. But in the human mind or the human brain, those things become abstracted in a certain way. But the use of meaning as a method of exploring either linguistics or music, and music is a little more clear, but it's not, you can't use that.
Yeah.
Because it to each person, as I said before, this mental capacity that emerged clearly about 40,000 years ago, which is evidence of the symbolic the characteristic of our thinking, you create an internal worldview. It is internal and it's intentional. And there are aspects of it that we share with one another. But in terms of the specifics of what the meaning that we create, that is totally individual.
I don't know. I always feel like the meaning that's like the art part. So maybe from that, if we accept that, then music isn't really music isn't art, or language isn't art. So, but I feel like I mean I just brought up that point about sending things into space because I feel like the reason why we think it would be important enough is because it has an artistic weight. But art, I guess, is not related to.
Well, what is the meaning of art? What does that word mean? What's the root of that word?
Art.
It means a fitting together. That's what it means. It means fit together. So the purpose of art is to fit together. So art is a means of expressing some kind of worldview or an aspect of the world. And it is a unique feature of human beings that they try to recreate the world in an art form, external. And so we represent our individual worldviews, and hopefully that they have some kind of common element to them to support who we are, where we are, and why we are. So we would consider Greek tragedy, which was entertainment, a kind of art, because it attempts to communicate a worldview, and that worldview is the psychological world of the human being, which is vastly different, so we assume, from any other living creature. Okay, well that's incredible. Now you have become experts on the ney, the Egyptian flute. It's been around since the pharaohs, right? I think we should all have an ensemble of neys and play a Mozart symphony.
Oh no.
All right, next week, please read from the air guitar, the Simple Heart. Yeah, I think it's the second essay in the book, and the essay also on Pontermo. I've forgotten exactly what the name of it is. And we're going to look at those two essays. Please bring your Frida Kahlo book, and also bring your minds. The Simple Heart and the one of Pontermo. It's something about, Pontermo is a Renaissance artist. I don't think that's the title of the essay. Anybody have their air guitar book here? Let me see it. What?
Pontormo's Rainbow.
Yes, that and the Simple Heart. I don't even know where the titles are in this. Are we on the same page? Everybody know? I'm not on the same page. Okay. All right, those two essays. We'll have fun reading them, and bring Frida Kahlo, and thank you so much.
I'll ask her if she wants to join, but I don't think she'd be too